Hey guys, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the committee's evaluation of your dissertation. So this is the form that the committee is to fill out, which will be then given the verdict for your work. So the first thing that happens, roughly speaking, is that the committee is found, and typically there are three members in the committee: first, second, and third opponent. The first opponent might typically be a international expert in the area. Could be someone from outside of Norway and maybe even the States, or Japan or whatever. Especially with in the age of Zoom and Corona, it's been easier to find suited opponents from abroad. The second opponent is also an expert, typically maybe a national one, maybe from another university in Norway, or a research institute which is related to the field of your topic. And third is an in-house person, typically an associate professor or a professor from the Department of Chemistry, who primarily serves as an administrator for the work to make sure that all the paperwork is done and is kind of done in accordance with how things work at the Department of Chemistry, or the University of Oslo, which department you're at. So who is picked to be on the committee? Well, I mean, this is typically suggested by the supervisors, but you might also have suggestions as well. And where are the criteria? Well, they have to be, have a adequate CV for doing stuff. For example, that they've published in the field. That they have a PhD, perhaps work as a researcher or an associate professor or professor, or something to that extent. And the same goes for the national, the second opponent. By the way, it doesn't have to be one international, one national. It could actually be both, but this is just the most common thing. But how do you pick from that sea of experts that might be in your field, in papers that you're citing or whatever? Well, typically you want to find somebody who is, understands your work, is interested in your work, and maybe also seems to be like a reasonable person. Maybe you've met him or her at a conference, or your supervisors might have done the same. They might know each other, but importantly, they can't have published too close in time with as co-authors. Neither can you. So the opponents, they need to be, they can't, you can't have a bias to that, that they're collaborators with you. So there should be, like, I think it's like 4 or 5 years that there can't be a publication with the suggested opponent and you or your supervisors. So and the typical administrator, it might be like I said, an associate or a full professor at the Department of Chemistry, and somebody, and you should expect that this person kind of knows how the system here works. So and typically the committee should be not just one sex. So it could be, for example, one guy and 2 girls, or whatever. But it can't be like 3 guys, for example, or 3 girls. Okay, so anyway, so they've said, yeah, sure, we'd love to see your work. Then they get this form that they have to look at and fill out. So this will be filled out maybe a couple pages long. It will be what they fill out. It will be about The dissertation's field of research, so they have to explain that they read it, basically. The content and objective of the dissertation, and feel free to point out some extra cool stuff that you've done. And the candidate's original contribution and independence in research, so that, you know, it has to be shown that that you've been a part of this work. You know, typically, like if you're, for example, a first author on these papers, then that also is something that suggests that, you know, you've had an independence and an original contribution in the work. In contrast to, for example, having 2 papers where you're fifth author, you know. I would say that's one of those things they're looking for. They want to see that, you know, your name is, you know, close to the top of the list of some of the papers that you're on. Oh yeah, and by the way, you also fill out forms explaining your papers, which you will send in beforehand, saying that I did this, my collaborator did that, and in that sense, they'll also be getting a very clear picture of how much of the work have you done, how much lab work did you do, who planned the work, etc. But that's something that is not in this dissertation, but this is additional paperwork actually. But you'll also be able to read it basically in your dissertation, both through your language and also looking at the contributions in your papers. The scientific standard dissertation, strengths and weaknesses. We'll get back in another chapter in this podcast series about what are strengths and weaknesses, like typical pitfalls. So I'll get back on that. The candidate's perspective on the research area and his/her ability to view on research in a greater context. That's also an important point, that you, in your thesis, that you're explaining, you know, what's going on in the research field, what's missing, and what do you want to make sure doesn't miss anymore, and how you made that, how you tried to at least make that not miss anymore, and perhaps what kind of consequence this will have for your research area. So you basically zoom out, look at what's the problem, you zoom in, describe what you're going to do and what you did, and then zoom out to put this in a context. That's a nice way. So funnel in, funnel out, but we'll also talk more about that in another chapter in this. So the technical quality of the dissertation, you know, outline, impression level within an international setting. So yeah, I mean, this can be everything from, does it look good? You know, do you have a logical introduction and presentation of your results? Are the results sound? You know, I mean, have you, you know, done replicates? Have you done controls? You know, and so forth and so on. And there might be other comments here. So, so you're basically going after, you know, you're looking at a scientific standard. So you want this to be, you know, proper science. You want somewhere to show that there's been original contributions from you, and you want to have a good technical quality. So please note that there's none of these questions here or things you have to write about that says, you know, is this work revolutionary, or is this work been published in the top 3 ranking journals in the field, or stuff like that. It's not that. What's the emphasis here? We're talking about scientific standard, your original contribution, technical quality. So, you know, it doesn't say anything here that how many papers were in Nature, you know, and so forth. That's not really the main point here. the point here is, have you done solid work? That's the point. You know, have you been doing science? You know, do you know how to do science? Not necessarily if the science you've done is super, you know, sexy as it's called, or whatever. It's like, you know, do you know how to do the science? So then basically you are a conclusion is made on your work. For example, the dissertation is worthy of defense without changes. Yay. The dissertation is worthy of defense, but has minor shortcomings, need to be corrected. No examination is necessary. So this might be that, you know, they've seen quite a few issues with your references, or maybe, you know, like the format of the references, maybe they think that there's some key references that are missing that they want you to discuss. Maybe they feel that your aim should be more clear, compared and should, you know, be reflected in the conclusions, you know, like kind of tweaks on this stuff. But, you know, they don't have to look at this. In this case, they don't look at it before the defense. They're basically trusting you that you're doing stuff that you feel is will help your defense or your dissertation. So you're basically getting advice on some minor things, which will improve your thesis. So yeah. So these are, you know, both of these are, you know, I'd say maybe this one is probably the most common. I would say from the loads of defenses I looked at, dissertations, this is probably the most common. Here's another one. The dissertation is possible worthy of defense, but there are major shortcomings that should be corrected before it can be defended. And then you get about 6 months to do this, and it needs to be re-examined. So this is basically a major revision of your work. This might be that they find that the structure of your dissertation is unclear. Maybe the language isn't clear. Maybe there's a significant number of references that's not, you know, being addressed. Maybe let's take another thing here. You know, the perspective on the research area is not there, that it's looking more like a lab notebook, you know, stuff like that. But this is, you know, this happens, and it's not really necessarily a major, what should I say? You shouldn't get too down if this happens. It happens with some really good, you know, work. I've seen this happen, but that the person maybe was a little bit too, it was running a little short on time, and kind of was throwing stuff together a little bit, and maybe wasn't consulting enough with, you know, other people or supervisors to make sure that it was being clear to read and so forth and so on. Again, coming back later to some more guidelines on the writing. And this, the last one, it falls short of the standards required for a PhD and is found not worthy of defense. So that's a pretty harsh decision. I have not seen that happen in dissertations that have been submitted. So I think that if you're using your supervisors or your co-students or co-authors and making sure that this looks like it's, you know, it's a proper work, then you shouldn't worry too much about that. You know, this is not really nothing you should worry too much about. Okay, so that's in general what is being evaluated here. scientific standard, you doing proper science, and you want to have a committee, people who know what this is about, and you're trying to find a committee who seem to be okay people, and are sympathetic to your work, and yeah. So that's what I wanted to say about the evaluation step.